Submission. Oh my gosh. That word, as a young woman, and I can tell you, I grew up with a father that was a little bit hard to handle. And so submitting to men was already a big stony place in my heart. So when I would read that verse and it was Paul, I would say, well, I'm not listening to Paul. He doesn't understand women. And I mean, you may be thinking the same thing right now. But I just dismissed that. Everything that Paul wrote, I was like, I'm not reading that part of the Bible because he tells me to submit. And I just hated that word. And so over the years, I have learned so much about that word. I've learned that if I don't submit to God, nothing can change in my life. So the first thing is to submit to God. And we've been talking about that. If God is God, then I have learned, wow, if he's really God and I'm not God, then I can submit to him. And so that was my first step, just humbling myself before the Lord. But I do remember I read a humbling verse too, like humble yourself before the Lord. And I said, well, I don't really feel good about that, God. I don't really want to do that. It took a while to feel peaceful, but this is what I want you guys to know is that he changed my heart. I was honest. I mean, I told him it's just going to be hard for me to humble myself. And then he started showing me that it didn't have to be hard. And then I chose that he would humble me and he would teach me to submit to him. And so as I learned to submit to God and trust him, that changed my relationship with trusting Lee. I learned that Lee is set in a position in my family as the priest and king of my household. It's a holy position. Lee wasn't always holy, but the position that God placed him in over me is holy. And through that position, he protects me and watches over me. Then I learned this hypotasso is what the word submit comes from. And I love learning that it means it's a word used in the armies back 2,000 years ago to put yourself in order so you could go into battle. Oh my gosh, y'all. We are in a battle. Somebody is trying to kill and steal and destroy us. His name is Satan. He doesn't have any power over us when we're keeping ourselves under the protection of God, but we are in this battle to not listen to the words that he speaks into us and to listen to God's word and to speak God's word. So when I heard that, it was like, oh, that is great. I am getting myself ordered for the battle. It's not detracting from me. Submitting to God has never taken one thing away from me. It has only made me stronger. It's only given me more gifts to share with other people. It's expanded my world. So where the world says that when we submit, it takes something away, I just want you to know that in God's kingdom, we are more when we understand submission. And so I just want to share that with you today, that you are able to submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. And one submission is to submit to your husband. Guess what? Your husband's supposed to submit to you too. It's both ways. But he has to own that, being the priest and king of your household. And there's a heavy burden and responsibility on his shoulders unless he shares it with God to do just that. So does anybody want to talk about that a little bit and share your thoughts on that? iPhone, unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. I saw you raising your hand.
I don't know. So one thing I'll say is, and honestly, it came from you and Lee when me and Andrew got married, and it stuck with me anytime we have an argument or a disagreement. And it is that if I can't agree with him and submit to him, and he can't agree and submit to me, the answer is always no. The answer is going to be no if we can't come to an agreement on it. And that has saved us so many times because it is biblical that I'm supposed to submit to him, but he is supposed to respect and honor and cherish me. And if we can't do that, then it's just a flat no. And it has stuck with us, and it has helped us through so many disagreements throughout our marriage. And it really, really was a great piece of advice.
And it is the truth that, if one of you is unsettled and the other one is thinking this is a great thing, we protect one another, in a marriage. So that's great. I'm so glad you brought that up, Cassie. If you're in a marriage where one of you doesn't know the Lord, it may be a lot tougher to walk in this area. But I also know that no matter what, God is going to protect you if you're trusting Him. So you may disagree with the decision. Your husband may go right ahead and do it anyway. You just put your trust back in the Lord and trust Him. But yes, when you two will decide that you're not going to move forward unless you agree, that is such a powerful thing in your marriage. It really is amazing. And I can tell you, like, I have had feelings, Lee has had feelings of like me with spending too much time with a coworker that was male, and he would caution me to pull back. I did the same thing with him at one point. I feel like we've made financial decisions when one of us decides we just need to do this and the other one disagrees. We find ourselves in debt and it's hard to get back out of it. So absolutely, that is like such a great piece of advice. Does somebody else have something they want to share?
I would love to share.
Okay, Victoria.
This is something that God's been working on me in the past, definitely the past 2 years. And because I am just like you, Denise, and I have all brothers, and from a really kind of hard, the men in my family were really hard. And so I viewed submission as a bad thing. In fact, my brothers used to joke because they'd be like, when I got married, they're like, Victoria, what's your view on submission? Knowing that I was going to be like, ugh, like that was for a different age. Okay. And so, because they know me and I'm their only sister, and I was like, I do not roll down, and just roll over. And so that's how I viewed it, as like weak. And my husband and I got married very young, at 20. Like it hasn't been until the past 2 years that God's really stirred up in my spirit. And what God showed me was like, okay, you're not wanting to submit because there's part of you that's wanting to control the safety, right? But do you trust him? And I was like, oh, yeah, I trust him. I love him. And so it wasn't even the fact that I wasn't submitting to him. It was the fact I didn't like the word. And I didn't want to say like what I was doing was surrendering or submitting, because I was like, oh, that's like surrender.
Yes.
But then that's what God showed me, is that this is the practice of submitting to him and surrendering to God, and surrendering the will of my life over to God. And that was also the other thing that God had to work with me, of being like, okay. So yeah, it's been a really beautiful process. Now I'm like, oh, okay, no, I actually do love to submit to my husband because he loves me and I trust him and he honors
Yes.
me. But yeah, man, that word immediately was like, nope.
Yeah, it's a trigger point for us, and there's a reason, because it's been abused, in the world. But and I can tell you too, again, if your husband thinks that word means something different than it does, then it's going to be hard for a time. But I don't want you to give up, because I know God changes hearts. He put you guys there. You two, he orders our steps. So I believe that if you're seeking the Lord, that he is in your relationship and he is working to change it. And I've got some good advice for you coming up of how that will start changing. But submission is a condition of our heart. So our heart has to change first. to be able to see God's glory in not only our marriage, but our entire lives and everybody we touch in our ministry. So submission then is something that we're going to pray together, that God will continue to just soften our hearts in that area and give us wisdom and understanding. And with submission, when I started submitting to God, like choosing to submit to him, of course. I mean, he's God. If he wants us to submit, we're going to submit. But he wants us to choose to submit to him and then to submit to our husbands in love. And so I'm just praying right now, Father, that you will make this not hard for these women on this call, for them to see your hand and to recognize where their husbands change, even in the next week, even in the next month, and write it down so that they can remember it like I did when I reread what I wrote from that time period. And I just ask you to bless them in this because it's a hard thing. And so the second lesson that I'm just offering to you tonight is that we submit to God and we choose to serve our husbands as Jesus served. And God changes us, and he does change our husbands. I know that.